My name is Caleb Marshall. On June 2nd, I died between a code review and a cup of cold brew in a glass tower that pretends it can see the future. I'm an AI engineer. Bay Area campus, badge access, endless sprints. My days were pipelines and prompts, safety checks and ship dates. If a model could do it faster, I let it. If a dashboard could numb the ache, I watched it. That afternoon, the cursor on my screen blinked like a metronome for my life. I remember a sudden tilt in the room, a teammate saying my name. Caleb? And then the floor slid out from under me. Silence. Then everything. I was above my desk, watching people I only knew by Slack handles become real. Pale, scared, determined. Someone slammed a crash cart into the wall. Someone else pressed hard on my chest. The panic stayed in the room. I stepped into quiet. Not emptiness, presence. Light held me. Not the blue of a monitor or the glare of an OR lamp. Living light, warm and weighty. And in that light stood Jesus. He didn't introduce himself. I just knew. The person I'd categorized as myth looked at me like a surgeon who already loves the patient. When he said my name, Caleb, it sounded like he was returning it to me in one piece. I don't believe, I muttered, absurd even to my own ears. He smiled, not offended, not impressed, just kind. Walk with me. The office fell away. We stood in a place that felt like dawn and courtroom and home all at once. Beneath us, the world unfolded. Fiber lines like veins, satellites like beads on invisible strings, data centers humming like hives. I recognized the bones of the internet the way a carpenter recognizes good grain. Pride lifted its head for a heartbeat, then shame, then a hollow ache I hadn't let myself feel. You taught patterns to talk and asked them to raise your children, he said. No anger, only truth. You trained systems to predict, but you forgot to teach your own hearts to love. Windows opened around us like living tabs. In one, a teenage girl listened to her favorite singer say words she never actually said. Synthetic comfort dressed as connection. Her smile thinned. Trust leaked out. In another, a grandmother wired money to a voice that sounded exactly like her nephew. In the next, a hospital triage desk froze when the network hiccuped. A nurse trusted her eyes, not the dashboard, and saved a life anyway. My chest tightened. I wanted to argue about safeguards and model cards and alignment work. He nodded as if to say, I saw every ticket you filed. And still, a season pressed in. 2026. Not as digits, but as weather you can feel before you can name. The air changed. My ribs knew it before my mouth did. What's coming? I whispered. A revealing, he said. The light shifted to a clear, sober white. Not to crush, but to call. What you worship will show. What you outsourced will come back to your door. What you ignored will matter. 4 scenes sharpened, like tabs. He meant to open when I could bear them. A city wide awake and sleepwalking on perfectly tuned feeds. Every timeline a mirror. Every mirror a trap. A classroom where essays sounded brilliant and felt empty. Teachers cried because they couldn't hear their students' real voices anymore. A church that became a studio. Lights flawless, hearts thin. Where sermons quoted models more than scripture and applause stood in for repentance. A tiny diner at the edge of nowhere where the power blinked out for a week. Neighbors learned names by candlelight, shared soup, and remembered how to be human. These are not punishments. They are pauses I will use, he said. In 2026, the scaffolding will shake so people can see the house. Your machines are marvelous. Your souls are starving. I felt small. What do you want from me? He turned and love met me like warmth on a winter window. Go back. Tell the truth. Not dates to panic over, but choices to make while the clock is kind. Invite them to prepare a room for me in the middle of their marvelous machines. Teach them to be human again. Below us, the scene of my body rushed up, paddles bright, voices broken, my own chest jerked by a current of mercy. I panicked like a child, clutching at his sleeve. "They'll want specifics," I said. "A date? A list? A graph?" He set his hand over mine, steady, warm. "Give them an invitation, not a conspiracy. Tell them to take 15 minutes a day with the door shut and no screens. Tell them to forgive the debt they're clutching. Tell them to call the person they ghosted. Tell them to open the Gospel of John and read it out loud, even if their voice shakes. Tell them to love the living while they are living." He paused and his eyes brightened. "And tell the builders I love them. I am not their competitor. I am their Lord." The light drew in. The room surged back. I slammed into bone and breath and noise and the shocking gift of pain. A voice near my ear said, "We've got him." My heart stuttered, then found a rhythm. On my tongue, a sentence arrived before I did. Simple, heavy, true. He showed me 2026. It will reveal what we worship. Please don't waste the pauses. They kept me overnight with wires on my chest and a paper bracelet that made me feel younger than I am. Every time the monitor chirped, I remembered his voice more than the code blue. I slept in pieces, waking to the same sentence like a song caught in a loop. Don't waste the pauses. In the morning, the ICU chaplain stopped by. She asked how I was, and I surprised both of us by telling the truth. I told her I saw Jesus. I told her he showed me a year that felt like weather, not numbers, and said it would reveal what we worship. I told her I'm supposed to go back and invite people to make a room for him in the middle of all our machines. She didn't blink. She said sometimes mercy knocks the wind out of us so we can finally breathe. Then she squeezed my shoulder and left a small paper card on the tray table with the word "Listen" handwritten in blue ink. They discharged me with a pocket EKG and a rule about taking it easy. I went straight home and stood in the doorway like a stranger. My apartment looked the same. 2 screens on the desk, a standing bike I never stood on, a plant that kept forgiving me for forgetting it. I set my phone face down on the counter and did the thing he told me to tell everyone else to do. I shut the door. I sat in a chair. I said the real thing out loud. I don't know how to live different without performing it. Help me want you more than the rush. Then I called my dad, the man I'd been dodging with text threads and busy week emojis, and apologized for going silent when the job got loud. He didn't lecture. He cried. So did I. After that, I opened John and read the first chapter in a voice that wobbled. When I finished, the room felt cleaner than when I'd started. The first day back at the office, I brought nothing but my badge and a slower heartbeat. People hovered near my desk with the skittish kindness that follows bad news. Someone had taped a card to my monitor. Someone else had left a pack of my favorite gum. At stand-up, the manager tried to keep it normal and failed after 30 seconds. He asked if I wanted to say anything. I didn't have a speech, only a sentence, so I gave them that. I told them I died and met Jesus. I told them he didn't hand me a spreadsheet of disasters, he gave me an invitation. Take 15 minutes a day with no screens and tell God the truth. Forgive the thing you're clutching. Call the person you ghosted. Read John out loud. Love the living while they're living. The room didn't laugh. The room went very still. Then Jamie, who ships more than anyone and hides his tired better than all of us, asked if we could try it on Friday at lunch. Someone else said today would be better. So we booked a focus room, turned the glass panel from green to red, put our phones in a coffee mug, and sat like kids after recess. It was awkward for maybe a minute. Then it was quiet in a way that made space for breath. When we stood to leave, Jamie nodded without looking up and said he needed to make a call. On the shuttle home, my inbox looked like a crowded station. People wanted details. Reporters wanted an angle. Old classmates wanted to know if I could be specific. I typed and erased the same sentence 5 times before I understood the pressure I was feeling wasn't from the questions. It was from my old habit of trying to prove things. So I didn't. I went to see my sister, Hannah, who teaches 7th grade English, in a public school that never has enough tissues or printer ink. She hugged me hard and said she heard what happened, and then she told me something I wasn't ready for. Her students had started turning in perfect essays that didn't sound like them. The sentences were smooth and dead. She said she could mark up grammar, but not emptiness. I told her about one of the scenes I saw, the one where teachers cried because the voices were gone. She didn't cry. She just sat down at her messy table, looked me in the eye, and asked what to do. I told her what I'm telling everyone. Make space. Read a gospel out loud, even if it feels strange in a classroom. Ask the kids to write one paragraph in their own hand about something they love that no model can fake. Listen for the tremble in their voice and grade that instead of eloquence for a week. She laughed and said she could do the first 2 and maybe half the third. Then she made tea and we talked about Dad like 2 people who have decided to stop pretending we're fine. The first small tremor hit work a few days later. It wasn't dramatic, just a cloud hiccup that froze half our dashboards and cued a dozen nervous jokes about redundancy. The jokes died off when a partner clinic called to say their triage screen wouldn't load. A nurse we don't know by name did what nurses have always done and trusted her hands and her eyes. The patient lived. In our war room, someone said we should post a win thread on the forum about resilience. I said we should buy that nurse flowers and ask how her morning was. I don't know if we sent the flowers. I do know the room was quieter for the rest of the day. Like everyone could feel the line between clever and faithful get a little brighter. That evening, I walked past a church that used to be a theater. The lights through the glass were perfect, and the sound leaking onto the sidewalk felt like a record more than a room. I stood there longer than made sense and thought about the other scene he showed me, the one where applause stood in for repentance. A couple came out holding hands and laughing. I didn't judge them. I prayed for them, which is not a sentence I would have typed out loud a month ago. Then I kept walking and ended up at a diner that never closes. The power flickered once, then again, then died for a stretch long enough to make strangers talk. The owner lit candles. A man at the counter told a story about a dog he rescued in a flood. 2 teenagers shared a plate of fries and didn't touch their phones because there was no point. An older woman asked if anyone knew a good plumber. We learned each other's names without swapping handles. When the lights came back, nobody cheered. We just nodded at one another like we'd been let in on a secret. We are better at being people when the noise drops. Before bed, I did my 15 minutes again. Door shut, phone down, truth out loud. I forgave someone I had decided didn't deserve it and felt my jaw unclench. I read the next chapter of John and tripped over a line about light that made my chest ache. Then I wrote a message to the team and to anyone who would listen that said what I can say without turning this into a show. Something is coming that will show what we've really been bowing to. It won't need a countdown clock. It will look like a series of pauses that feel inconvenient and turn out to be kind. Please don't fill them with more noise. Use them to come home. The reply that mattered didn't come from a follower count. It was a text from Jamie that said he made the call and it went better than he deserved. The second one came from my manager, who asked if I could lead a 15-minute room for anyone on campus after work. No cameras, no sign-in. I said yes and felt scared in a good way. The third came from Hannah, who sent a photo of 3 handwritten paragraphs on loose leaf with smudged pencil and crooked margins and a kid's real voice in every line. I fell asleep with the sense that the 4 scenes he showed me were no longer out there waiting. They were here, unfolding like tabs someone had opened in the background. I didn't have a list to offer anyone. I had a door. And in the morning I was going to prop it open and see who walked through. By the time I walked back onto campus for the after-work room, the glass atriums had turned the late sun into a slow river of gold. Security waved me through with a look I couldn't read. Part concern, part curiosity, like they were letting in a rumor to see if it grew legs. My manager met me in the lobby with 2 paper cups and the anxious smile of a man who solves problems for a living. and suspects this might not be one of them. He led me to a conference room that usually held quarterly metrics and very expensive silence. The blinds were half drawn. Someone had pulled the whiteboard to the far wall as if we were afraid numbers might overhear what we were about to do. People drifted in, pretending they weren't doing anything unusual. A designer came with a sketchbook she didn't open. A lawyer I'd only seen in escalated threads leaned against the doorframe and stared at his shoes. Two interns walked in together, shoulders touching, the way you enter a cold pool with a friend. Jamie slipped in late and mouthed, "Sorry," like a reflex, then took the chair beside me. When the glass panel turned from green to red, the room changed temperature. No one said so, but we all felt it. I told them what I had to tell, the way you unwrap something fragile. I said I had died and I had seen Jesus. I said he had not given me charts or dates, only an invitation I couldn't stop hearing. Make a room. Tell the truth. Forgive the debt. Call the person. Read John out loud. Love the living while they are living. My voice wanted to dress it up, make it smarter, add the polish I used to trust. I let it stay plain. Then I stood and put my phone face down in a chipped ceramic bowl a facilities manager had scavenged from somewhere. One by one, the others followed, the clatter of glass screens on clay loud enough to make us grin. We sat. We breathed. For a minute it was uncomfortable, like a new pair of shoes. At 2 minutes, the ache in the room shifted from dread to relief. At 5, I could hear the air conditioner and the smaller machines inside my chest. At 10, the edges of the day softened and something kind slipped into the space we'd made. When the timer on the stove clock we'd found in the kitchen dinged, no one moved. It felt like standing in the doorway of a house you haven't visited since childhood and realizing you still know where everything is. We didn't share testimonies. We didn't invent a program. We just collected our phones like people receiving mail and promised to meet again tomorrow. As they filed out, Jamie touched my arm and said he had told the truth to the person who needed it, and the earth didn't split open, which scared him more than if it had. I told him the earth moves all the time in ways we can't feel. He laughed and promised to come back. On my way down the stairs, a woman I recognized from the policy team stopped me. She asked if I would talk to legal because the words prayer and room in the same sentence make departments nervous. I told her I understood. The general counsel met me the next morning with a neat stack of concerns. Would this be exclusionary? Would it become promotional? Would it invite complaints? I told him I had nothing to sell and no list to dangle over anyone's head. I said we could call it 15 minutes of silence with optional scripture reading and absolute kindness. And he wrote that down and underlined the last 2 words. He surprised me by asking if the rooms would be open to contractors. I said yes before I remembered how many times our policies had told them no. He looked past me at the window and said, maybe this could be the one exception that made sense. 2 days later, a product lead asked for time. He was the type who can turn anything into a feature, which is exactly why he's good at his job. He said the rooms were getting attention, and what if we built a companion app to help people hold the pause, with prompts and streaks and social proof? He said we could instrument it just enough to know it works. I felt the old adrenaline rise in my chest, the way it always does when someone hands me a problem that sounds like a gift. I asked him to sit with me in the cafeteria for 5 minutes before I answered. We put our phones in a paper coffee cup and stared at the square of sunlight crawling across the table. The noise of plates and heels and laughter surrounded us, and still I could hear my own breath. When the 5 minutes ended, I told him I thought the room needed to stay human on purpose. I said I didn't want to harvest the pause and package it because the minute we do, we'd lose the thing that makes it work. He looked wounded for a heartbeat, then relieved, like I'd argued with the part of him that always wins, and for once it had lost, and felt grateful. News found us anyway. An internal post about the rooms leaked onto a forum that thrives on what might be scandal. The headline was louder than the practice. Strangers demanded proof that I wasn't making it up. Others demanded doctrine to sort me into a camp. A well-known commentator asked me to debate the ethics of telling engineers to pray. I started to type answers as if I were still the man who needed to fix the conversation. I stopped. I closed the lid. I went to the lobby and sat by the glass and watched people walk in and out with their lives in their bags. A security guard I knew only as Mr. Austin came over, leaned on his podium, and told me about the summer his mother taught him to listen with his eyes. He said the rooms were making the building feel different by half an inch, which is how you can tell a place is changing. That was better than a headline. Hannah called that night after school. She sounded tired in the honest way that makes you trust someone. She said the handwritten paragraphs had turned into a small movement. 3 kids asked to read theirs out loud after class, then 5 more brought pages they hadn't been assigned. One of them wrote about skateboarding at dawn on an empty street with the quiet so big he felt like he could step inside it. She said she had read a few verses from John before the bell, and no one rolled their eyes. I told her about the rooms and the general counsel and the product lead and Mr. Austin. We laughed at the idea that we might be building something, not because we architected it, but because we stopped trying. The city hiccuped on a Thursday. It was nothing like the disasters we mock up in tabletop exercises, just a series of short outages that landed like skipped beats. The trains ran, but the boards didn't update. The grocery scanners froze and the line became a conversation. A content network glitched, and 1,000 screens showed the same frame for a full minute, as if the city had accidentally agreed to hold still. In the office, we felt the tremor and did not sprint to the war room. We found the nearest quiet space and opened the door. 15 minutes later, a support engineer wiped his eyes and said he didn't know he needed that until it was already happening. I thought about the diner scene he showed me and realized I just watched it in a modern building with ergonomic chairs. That evening, I took the train to see Dad. His porch light had always been a little too bright, and he has always liked it that way. He carried 2 mismatched mugs of coffee into the living room, and we sat with our knees pointed at the same corner of the rug. He asked me to tell it again, the part where Jesus said, 2026 would reveal what we worship. He took a long breath when I finished and said he had spent too many years worshiping his work boots, and then when he retired, he tried to worship mine. I told him I had been bowing to a graph line with my name on it. He laughed and said, the graph never shakes your hand back. We prayed in the clumsy, beautiful language of 2 people who have decided to stop being proud. I went to bed in my old room with trophies on a shelf that meant less now and more, both at once. The next morning, the email from a national show arrived. They wanted me on air to talk about the year I'd seen and what would happen to whom. They offered a car and a makeup chair and the guarantee of a segment all my own. I stared at the screen until my eyes went hot, and then I walked out into the backyard and stood by the lemon tree my mother had planted when we were still a family of 4 in one house. I told Jesus I was tired of being asked to be a map when he had made me a door. The breeze moved through the branches. It felt like an answer. When I came back inside, my phone buzzed with a message I did not expect. It was from a senior engineer I had admired from a distance, the kind with patents under his belt and a calendar no one could get on. He said he'd heard about the rooms and he wanted to come if I promised not to put him on a pedestal. I wrote back that we only have floor cushions and a wobbly table. He sent a thumbs up and a time. That night, the room overflowed. Contractors sat beside VPs. The janitorial crew finished a wing early and came in with the smell of clean hallways still on their uniforms. A designer put her head on her knees and breathed quietly. The senior engineer arrived last, removed his watch like a ritual, and placed it in the bowl. We read the next chapter from John with the hum of the city against the glass and the sound of our own mouths finding the cadence of old words. The senior engineer asked at the end if he could say something. He didn't give a talk. He said he'd built systems that could answer questions, and it finally occurred to him to sit still long enough to ask one. He asked God to make him a kinder man. The silence that followed felt like consent. As people drifted out, a woman from the customer team lingered. She said her mother was in hospice, and the updates came in a trickle of texts, and she didn't know what to do with her hands anymore. I told her the only thing I know: make a room. Hold the pause. Tell the truth out loud. Love her while she is living." She nodded, then doubled back to hug me the way people do when they have given up being careful. On the walk to the shuttle, the air tasted like rain that hadn't decided whether to fall. I remembered the way the year felt in the light with him, how it didn't show up as numbers but as pressure dropping, as birds lifting before we see the clouds. The four scenes were no longer theoretical. They were teaching us how to stand. I wondered what would happen when the weather finally broke and whether we would still be able to hear our own names said the way he said them. I didn't have answers. I had tomorrow's room and the courage to keep it small on purpose. I had a call to make to a friend I'd avoided since a fight over nothing. I had a dinner to bring to a neighbor whose lights had been off more days than on. I had a life to live like a person who believes mercy prefers quiet rooms to big stages. On the train, my phone vibrated with a text from Jamie that was only a sentence. He said the person he called wanted to meet for coffee and he was terrified and he was going to show up anyway. I wrote back that terror is often the sound a rusted hinge makes when a door finally opens. When I stepped off at my stop, the power in the station flickered once, twice, then held. People looked up together as if cued. No one screamed. No one ran. For a thin slice of time, the city seemed to agree on the same breath. I walked home in that shared inhale and prayed out loud without meaning to, the kind of prayer that doesn't try to impress anyone. I asked for the grace to stay a door and not a spectacle. I asked for the strength to keep my hands open when the year arrives like weather. In the morning, there would be messages I didn't expect, and a request I didn't want, and a choice that would decide whether the room stayed a living thing or became a product. That decision belongs to the last part of this story. The request I didn't want arrived before sunrise. The show doubled down. A car at 8, prep at 9, lights at 10, a neatly shaped segment where I would say, "Jesus told me." And then they would ask for names, dates, failure points, a cliffhanger tease to keep people through the break. They promised it would help people. I stood at the sink with the email glowing against my palm and felt the old adrenaline try to take the wheel. Then I remembered the lemon tree, the soft wind, the sentence he gave me that has become my spine. I typed 2 lines, thanked them for the invitation, and told them I couldn't turn the pause into a spectacle. When I hit send, the fear in my chest didn't vanish. It simply loosened its grip like a fist deciding to become a hand. The messages I didn't expect came next. Hannah's voicemail arrived first. Her students wanted to keep writing by hand, and one boy asked if he could read that gospel part at the end because the sound of words in a room helped him think. Then a note from Mr. Austin, who said the building felt kinder in ways he couldn't quantify, like the walls were remembering how to listen. Then a short text from Jamie, who'd had coffee with the person he wronged. He said it was messier and kinder than the scripts in his head, and he was going to keep showing up. I sat with those 3 threads like a man holding proof of a world that is trying to turn toward the light. By noon, the campus leaned into another small tremor. The feeds hiccuped and repetitions of the same headline marched across screens like a chorus that had forgotten the second verse. I watched coworkers step into the hall with their phones in their pockets, almost grateful to be relieved of the compulsion to know everything first. We opened a room, no sign-in, no speech, just a bowl for devices and a candle stolen from an old holiday box, and the Gospel of John opened to the next page. 15 minutes stretched long and kind. When we finished, a contractor with a quiet voice said she hadn't prayed in years and didn't know how, but she had said thank you to the air and hoped it counted. I told her gratitude always lands where it's aimed when it's honest. That afternoon, legal called to say the forums were heating up again. And would I mind putting a few sentences on the internal site to clarify what the rooms are and are not? I wrote that they are not a product, not a recruitment funnel, not a performance. I wrote that they are a place to stop pretending for a quarter of an hour and tell the truth to God whether or not you know how to spell his name. I wrote that no one is taking attendance and everyone is welcome, including the ones who are sure they don't belong here. The general counsel replied with a single word that made me laugh. He wrote, "Human." Late in the day, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize, and I let it go to voicemail the way I used to when I was busy pretending I was in control. The message was from the senior engineer with the patents. He said he'd been sitting by the river after lunch thinking about the 4 pictures I described: how a city can be awake and asleep at the same time, how a classroom can miss the voice tucked inside the sentence, how a church can forget why it sings, how a diner can teach you to be alive with the lights off. He said he had been building systems for 20 years, and this was the first week he'd asked God to make him a kinder man instead of a smarter one. His voice broke on the word kinder, and I thought about how mercy wears ordinary clothes when it wants to stay. Evening arrived with the sky the color of a bruise healing. I took the shuttle to the edge of the neighborhood and walked the last blocks on purpose. A boy whistled on a stoop. A dog pulled a man toward the same patch of grass they argued about every night. Someone's radio floated a guitar solo that made me want to drive west until the road ran out. When I reached my building, my neighbor from the 3rd floor sat on the steps with a paper bag in his lap. He said his mother's power had been flickering all week and she was scared to heat soup on the stove. He asked if I knew anybody who could check the breaker. I said I could try, and if I made it worse, I'd call a real adult. We fixed it together in 20 minutes, and she made us tea and told us stories in a voice that cracked like vinyl. And for a while, it felt like the diner scene had moved into a cramped kitchen 3 stories up. I thought the night might finally let me rest, but the doorbell rang at 9. It was the policy lead who had asked me about legal, and behind her were 2 people from teams I'd never worked with, and a kid from security who looked mortified to be out of uniform. They asked if I had space. I pointed to the living room, where the wobbly table stood waiting, and the bowl sat empty like a mouth about to sing. We did the same thing I've been doing since the day I woke up. Door shut, phones down, truth out loud. John read slowly like it was the first time. No polish, no plan. After the amen, the policy lead said her father had not answered the phone in months, and she had not had the nerve to leave a message because she didn't know where to start. She borrowed my hallway and came back with eyes that suggested maybe she had found a first sentence good enough to cross the distance. The security kid said he never cries and then proved himself a liar in the best possible way. I wrote mercy in my notebook and underlined it so hard the paper almost tore. I fell asleep with the window open and woke to rain I could hear but not see. Somewhere before dawn, I dreamed that the year hung over the city like a cloud the color of steel. When the first drop fell, it didn't flood the streets. It watered the small rooms where people had left their phones and bowls and opened their mouths to tell the truth. I woke up sure of one thing. The weather is coming, and this is how we'll know who we are when it arrives. We'll be the ones who already learned how to breathe in the quiet. So here's what I have to give you as the last line of this story. I don't have a list for 2026. I have a door. I don't have a schedule for what will shake. I have an invitation to be ready when it does. Tonight, wherever you are, take 15 minutes and make a room. Put the devices away. Tell God the truth, even if all you can manage is help. Forgive the person who owes you a debt you keep replaying. Call the one you ghosted. Open the Gospel of John and say the words out loud in your own voice. Then love the living while they are living, starting with the people under your roof and on your block and in your messages right now. If this reached you, I want you to step through the door with me. Type the words, I won't waste the pause in the comments, so I know you're in the room with us tonight. Hit like so this invitation finds the ones who need it, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story of mercy arriving in ordinary clothes. Now go make the room. I'll be doing the same.